Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
We've once again made it to Friday, and we're very glad that you are with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for you today, as usual. And Jim, it's not too often Democrats are in the good martini, although Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have spent a considerable amount of time there over the past year and change. But today it's Florida Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. She's retiring this year, which means, since you're not running for re-election, you can be a little more honest in your public statements. And she is a co-chair of the moderate Blue Dog Coalition, the ever-dwindling group of moderates in the House Democratic Caucus. And during an interview, she was pretty blunt about the way she believes that leadership is favoring progressives, even to the point of unleashing activist groups against members like her to pretty much browbeat her into supporting things like Build Back Better and other legislation that she's not particularly comfortable with. She talks about, first of all, the large amount of money that Democratic interest groups have spent against moderate members of the party. See Henry Cuellar down in Texas, who's off to a runoff next month. He's been pretty tough on the border and some other issues, and so most of the party don't want him in Congress anymore. But she also says that she got criticism for her vote to support Kate's Law, a bill that increased prison sentences for illegal immigrants found re-entering the country. And so she says, quote, "A lot of these outside groups that purport to represent a specific interest are just an extension of the leadership instead of purely focusing on their issue area." The interview was with Rachel Bade of Politico. And here's another interesting part. A frequent critic of the Squad and other left-wing Democrats, Murphy has complained about a toxic environment with plenty of Democratic on Democratic violence. She directly blamed party leadership for that atmosphere in the interview, saying, quote, "You can't promise rainbows and unicorns when you know that you don't have the votes for it, because the difference between rainbows and unicorns and political reality is going to be disappointment and anger." Jim, that sounds like something you've said a lot, particularly as it relates to the 50-50 Senate. But given the pretty slim margin in the House, reality strikes again there, too.
Greg, looking at this in retrospect, the 2020 Democratic Party national platform at the convention really should not have called for unicorns and rainbows for every American. That probably was a mistake. A little exaggeration there, but I think we get the point she's getting at. It is a fascinating interview. And I think what we're seeing is a historical pattern repeating itself, but a demonstration of how much the Overton window, this notion of what is considered politically feasible and normal, and notice I'm making air quotes as I say that. You can't see it, but trust me, I am. In the span from even the Obama days. I mean, when Democrats won the control of the House of Representatives in 2006, Rahm Emanuel was running the DCCC then, and he did it on the backs of guys like Heath Shuler, the former infamous Washington Redskins quarterback, but who won in a pretty red or at least purple district down in North Carolina. And I remember Heath Shuler, he was that, if not the most rightward guy in the Democratic caucus, he was probably in those 4 or 5 House Democrats who were most likely to vote with Republicans. But that's what he needed to do to win and get reelected in his district. And that meant Heath Shuler was by most standards pro-gun. And I seem to remember him speaking at an NRA convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. That was in his home state. I don't think it was his home district, but it was one of those things where in order to be reelected in his district, he had to demonstrate, I am not pro-gun control, I am not pro-choice, I share your values, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Heath Shuler got defeated in the 2010 wave, I'm pretty sure, and he's not come back. Every once in a while, there's a rumor of him running again or something. But basically, you really can't be a pro-life Democrat these days. You really can't be a pro-gun Democrat these days. And if one of the examples that Murphy offers, I think is very revealing, is she points out that she was one of the Democrats who voted for Kate's Law, which was this idea where it was going to stricter enforcement rules for people who were multiple offenders of violating immigration laws. It was over that shooting of Kate in San Francisco. It was this unbelievable tragedy. The Trump administration made a big deal out of it. I believe the investigation determined that it was an accident. But it cost a young woman her life, and the person who fired the gun was a illegal immigrant who'd been arrested several times, right? And so here's Murphy saying, like, look, I believe in immigration and comprehensive immigration reform and an ability for people to immigrate to the United States in a legal way. But I also believe in law and order and ensuring we hold people who commit crimes accountable. And she points out the immigrant groups immediately went to, you're anti-immigrant. And she says, look at me, I'm a refugee. I am an immigrant. I'm not anti-immigrant. I found that they were maligning my motivations as opposed to trying to seek to understand my motivations and understand the policy concerns I had. She describes, we had one meeting that got so heated and passionate that the nun who was there had to stand up and ask everybody to settle down, calm down the hostilities. I mean, thank God for that. Stephanie Murphy is by no stretch of the imagination a conservative, right? She may have certain issues in which she's going to vote against the progressive orthodoxy, partially because of her district, but also partially because of her values. But I think by most measurements, we look at Stephanie Murphy and see a fairly mainstream Democrat. This is not Heath Shuler. And Stephanie Murphy is saying the attitudes in Congress have made it impossible for her and make her no longer wish to stay in Congress and run for re-election. I think Stephanie Murphy is still, by congressional standards, she's a young woman. She's got other stuff she wants to do with her life, right? Now, this is in some ways, this is, great news for Republicans. It makes them, this is a district they easily have at least a decent shot at. And the exodus of moderate Democrats means a lot more, more likely to be replaced by Republicans, and you're more likely to have a big Republican majority in the House. That said, for the purposes of the country, I would prefer a more centrist Democratic Party, and I would prefer a Democratic Party that is sane. And if the squad is chasing Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy out of the House, then it is a sign that the Democrats are heading in an insanely left direction. They'll probably lose the House and become a small rump party, at least for one cycle, until they learn their hard lessons. But in the end, it's still not good to see one of the two major parties in this country shift so far to the left so quickly.
The fact that the party is drifting that far to the left means we're really, really close to having some really, really horrible things being passed through the Congress. I mean, right now, if Manchin and Sinema weren't opposed to killing the filibuster, those things would be happening right now. That's how close we are to the far left, really changing this country in significant ways.
Talk about the stuff of nightmares, Greg.
Exactly. Another nightmare is the last thing you want. And after this week in the news cycle we've had, it would be understandable, but it's potentially avoidable if you have the best possible bedding and towels and sheets and slippers and all that great stuff. But right now, MyPillow.com focusing on their fantastic deal for the 6-piece MyPillow towel set. Now, normally this towel set goes for $109.99, and now you can get it for $39.99 per set.
The MyPillow 6-piece towel set is made from cotton grown right here in the United States. Now, some other towels might feel good, but they don't absorb very well, or maybe they absorb well, but they don't feel good. Well, every MyPillow towel is made from proprietary technology that makes them highly absorbent and soft to the touch. There's none of that lotiony feel. Every set comes with 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They're available in a variety of colors and sizes. They're machine washable, they have a 60-day money-back guarantee, and they have a 1-year limited warranty.
For a limited time, get the MyPillow 6-piece towel set regularly $109.99 for only $39.99 with the promo code Martini. Visit MyPillow.com/Martini or call 800-874-0104. You'll also find deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow mattress topper, MyPillow Giza Dream Sheets, and so much more. Get your 6-piece MyPillow towel set for just $39.99 today at MyPillow.com/Martini or call 800-874-0104. MyPillow.com/Martini. All right, Jim, on to the bad martini now. And one of the big issues, of course, in the Virginia governor's race last year was schools. And the over and over example of schools, Loudoun County in particular, but others as well, telling parents, you just stay out of this. We've got this covered, whether it was what's in the curriculum or COVID restrictions and policies and that sort of thing. And then it all kind of came to a head in Loudoun County when it turned out that the administrators there pretty much covered up a sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl. And that type of cover-up really struck a chord with Virginia voters, and it's one of the big reasons Glenn Youngkin and the Republican ticket got elected. And Jim, it's happening again in Northern Virginia. This time, National Review Online has the story, and as Stepman is the author of this, we have learned that the Alexandria School District and School Board withheld information from parents about a violent sexual assault by multiple people in a city high school, one that sent the victim to the hospital and led to a police investigation. Alexandria police have now directly confirmed to Independent Women's Forum via email that the police arrested a 14-year-old suspect in early December for, quote, aggravated sexual battery, rape, and forcible sodomy in connection with the October incident at Minnie Howard campus. The police declined to share additional detail about the incident due to the fact that both the victim and the suspect are juvenile. And so the public schools also saying, quote, we are unable to provide information regarding specifics about students. But this did come up in communications and in emails between school officials. The police were involved. Parents, however, not notified. The emails that Inez looks at and were handed over as part of a Freedom of Information Act request were exchanged days before a joint board council hearing focused on reinstating school resource officers to the city's school campuses after a previous school board decision removing the police generated controversy. And there was just one offhanded reference to a potential sexual assault that is being investigated. And as she points out, Jim, it's a gang rape. This 14-year-old girl was gang raped and parents were kept in the dark. So I don't know what's happening with administrators in Northern Virginia and possibly beyond, but this is insane.
It is, Greg. It's funny, when you sent me that story and said we should talk about this, I started thinking about the experience we saw at the school shooting in Florida, where it was Stoneman Douglas, I believe, where there were reports that the gunman, the student who was so troubled, had a lot of run-ins, had all kinds of issues. But no school wants to admit that they have a safety problem. And the schools, obviously, there's been this push for schools to get cops out of schools and to not have school discipline issues dealt with through the legal system. That if you can avoid giving a kid a criminal record, then it'll help them out later in life and all that kind of stuff. And I think in the broad contours of that argument, yeah, there are certain cases in which you might want to say, all right, we don't want to give a kid a criminal record. He's a good kid who made a big mistakes and they understand the consequences of that mistake, et cetera, et cetera. But there also seems to be this incentive for school administrators, for schools to either downplay or perhaps in some cases even cover up the extent of serious criminal activity within their halls. And that you kind of wonder if that's what's going on here. We've already seen schools that have this school administrators and teachers and other officials who have this adversarial attitude towards parents, this attitude of, no, we don't need to show you our curriculum. You're not entitled to know that. We're not going to tell you you're not allowed to decide what goes into our school libraries. We'll decide what books your kids can and can't read. We'll decide whether the schools are going to be open, right? And so this whole dynamic here of school administrators thinking they know best, school administrators believing, no, we're at best. This is a really unfortunate, horrific set of circumstances that now appears to not just be one bad apple at one school. And you kind of wonder if we have inadvertently created a system of incentives where the worst thing you can do as a school administrator is say, yes, a crime occurred in our school. It needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be dealt with, because then you're one, besides the fact that you freak out the community and you upset people and all that stuff, will you get grants for having an improved school? Will you get rated lower, right? Will you see, in other words, is all of the incentives to cover up the crimes committed in your schools instead of actually addressing it and tackling it head on? There's a possibility that is the case. It is certainly an unnerving series, like a pattern starting to form of school administrators who would rather sweep it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen, don't tell anybody, and hope that this passes and everyone just goes on, and we won't worry about justice and we won't worry about consequences for those who have committed, in some cases, some horrific, violent sexual crimes.
Boy, Jim, I don't know what is a better advertisement for school choice than to hear stories like this where, yeah, parents would be upset to know what happened at the school, but I think they're going to be more upset to think the administrators hid the truth from them. School choice has always been a good issue for conservatives, and I don't think there's ever been a better time to push that issue than in this year's elections. All right. Well, in addition to getting a lot of sleep this weekend, you also might want to get outside this weekend. It's supposed to be pretty nice around here in the Washington, D.C. area, but it's also a great chance to figure out what kind of survival gear you need. And when it comes to knives and filters and cooking materials, there's no better place to go than Battlbox. Because look, if you aren't quite sure what you need for outdoor gear, you do not need to worry, because if you sign up for a Battlbox, that gear finds you.
Battlbox is your go-to monthly subscription for hand-picked outdoor survival and everyday carry gear. Getting the best gear for yourself not only takes time, but it can be incredibly expensive. That's why Battlebox brings you name brand, high quality products every month at just half the price of what they cost on their own. Just pick the box that works for you and get tested and vetted products that you can trust that are selected by an expert team of outdoor professionals, from an Aquapod emergency water kit to an Atomic Bear survival bivy, delivered right to your doorstep each month. Battlebox has shipped more than 1 million boxes since 2015 and has been featured everywhere from the New York Times to Survivor's Edge. Find out why outdoor enthusiasts call Battlebox the best gear I never knew I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim and I have both gotten the battle box, and I think as guys, you just open that box and you're like, oh man, this stuff is awesome. This stuff is so cool. I can use it, obviously, if we're in the outdoors, but I can also find uses for it even around the house. So it's just very practical, and it's high quality products that you're getting in the battle box. So check it out. And from now until March 31st, get a free mystery box worth over $115 with any new subscription at trybattlebox.com/martini. That's a free mystery box worth more than $115 right now at trybattlebox.com/martini. That's TRYBATTLBOX. Trybattlebox.com/martini. On to the crazy martini now. And Jim, we tried. We said it last week when Jussie Smollett got sentenced to 150 days in jail. Let's hope that this is the last time we're going to talk about Jussie Smollett. It seems like the punishment was fair. He didn't get away with it. The judge read him the riot act, and he's going to pay for faking this hate crime. Well, we're talking about Jussie Smollett again. And why? Well, because he's already out of jail. After 6 whopping days of a 150-day jail sentence, a court has granted his release pending his appeal. Now, there are multiple arguments. One is that he would have already served his entire 150-day sentence by the time the court got around to acting on his appeal, and so that would seem to be the stronger argument. But there's also the argument that the prosecution is not buying at all, that Smollett has compromised immunity and shouldn't be exposed to potential COVID transmission behind bars. They also claim that racism and homophobia were involved in Smollett's sentencing, and so therefore that was unfair to put him behind bars. There was also issues related to his health because he will only drink ice water. He wouldn't eat any food for the last 6 days. So, Jim, this just drama continues, and I have my doubts as to whether he'll ever be back in jail.
Yeah, we tried, dear listeners, and it just feels like something we need to observe. It is becoming an absolutely, jaw-dropping exercise in justice being delayed, and in that case, being justice denied. He's been nailed to the wall. They're really from the very beginning, people had strong suspicions of the story. He wasn't. He sent the police on a wild goose chase. And I'd love to see, his lawyers prove that racism and homophobia was the cause of the motive of the judge in the sentence or something like that. It really feels like Jussie Smollett believes that any decision that doesn't go his way, anything he doesn't like in this world, he can blame upon racism and homophobia instead of being the consequences of his own actions. So, I wish I had better news to send along on this. It really does seem that this is going to be a long process. The appellate court in Illinois, as the New York Times subtly puts it, is not built for speed. Proceedings of all sorts of the courts typically take about a year or 2 years. So this is going to go on for a long time. We will not be talking about it on this podcast during that whole time. But you just want to see, Jussie Smollett spend some time in jail. Now, he did spend 6 days, but in the end, I think when you send the entire city on a wild goose chase looking for this utterly implausible, non-existent threat, and you stir up tensions and you make people fear that they're going to be attacked, and you do the whole thing in an attempt to build your name ID and to get, make yourself a bigger celebrity and all that stuff. I think you should go to jail. I think you should have serious consequences for this. And unfortunately, the appellate court does not want him in jail while the appeals process is going, which will keep him out of jail for a long time. I think he'll probably lose. But I'm not a lawyer, so who knows how this will shake out, right?
On that note, Jim, I feel like we're heading into the weekend on some fumes. Let's try to recharge and reconvene on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks so much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. We really appreciate those, and they help the podcast. Find us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. And follow us on Twitter. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend, and please join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.
Radio America news director and the 3 Martini Lunch podcast host, my friend, the great and all-powerful Greg Corombos, joins me to discuss the biggest issues and the impact of Biden's unpopularity on the midterm elections. I'm Sarah Carter. On the latest Sarah Carter Show, I'll also explain why Hispanic voters are fleeing the Democrats and are now planning to vote for the GOP. Join me. Follow the Sarah Carter Show at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.